The sun beat down mercilessly on Dry Creek's wooden platform, as Beatrice Norwood clutched her valise with trembling fingers, the world around her beginning to blur. She had traveled 3 days by rail from Boston, surviving on little more than crackers and tepid water, determined to reach Wyoming territory where a teaching position awaited. Now, as passengers disembarked around her, Beatrice felt her strength finally abandon her completely. The depot swam before her eyes, the distant mountains melting into the azure sky as her knees buckled beneath her skirts. The last thing she remembered was the dusty planks rushing up to meet her face and a shout from somewhere nearby before darkness claimed her. Lucas Whitaker had just delivered 3 wild Mustangs to the livery when he heard the commotion at the train depot across the street. At 30 years old, he'd seen plenty of trouble in Dry Creek, but something about the crowd gathering on the platform made him pause. Adjusting his worn Stetson, he crossed the sun-baked dirt road with long strides, his spurs jingling with each step. "Stand back, give her air," he commanded, pushing through the circle of onlookers to find a young woman sprawled unconscious on the wooden platform. Her chestnut hair had come partially loose from its pins, and her pale face was streaked with dust from travel. A station master was awkwardly fanning her with his hat while an elderly woman clucked in concern. "She just dropped like a stone, poor thing," the old woman explained. "Been sitting there looking peaky since the train pulled in." Lucas knelt beside the fallen woman, noting the quality of her traveling dress despite its wrinkled state. She was clearly not from Dry Creek or anywhere near Wyoming territory. Her breathing was shallow but steady. "Has anyone sent for Doc Pearson?" Lucas asked, looking around. "He's out at the Miller place." "Their boy broke his arm," the station master replied. Lucas made a quick decision. "She needs water and rest." With practiced ease, he slid one arm beneath her shoulders and the other under her knees, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. Her head lolled against his chest, and he caught the faint scent of lavender beneath the dust of travel. "Her bag," the elderly woman said, pointing to a valise nearby. "You can't just leave it." "Grab it for me, Mrs. Holloway, if you would," Lucas said. "I'll take her to Ma's boarding house. It's closest." "The woman's valise and a small carpet bag in hand, Mrs." Holloway followed as Lucas carried the unconscious stranger down Dry Creek's main street. A few townsfolk stopped to stare, but Lucas paid them no mind. The woman in his arms was burning with fever, and her breathing had grown more labored. His mother's boarding house was a 2-story clapboard building with a wide front porch, the most respectable establishment in town. Martha Whitaker had run it since Lucas's father died 10 years ago, turning it into both their livelihood and home. "Ma," Lucas called as he shouldered open the front door. "We need help." Martha Whitaker emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. At 55, she was still a handsome woman with steel-gray hair and Lucas's same sharp blue eyes. She took in the scene in an instant. "Upstairs, the blue room," she directed without hesitation. "What happened?" "Collapsed at the depot," Lucas explained as he carried the woman up the narrow staircase. "No one knows who she is. Doc's out at the Millers." The blue room was small but immaculate, with fresh linens on the bed and curtains fluttering in the breeze from the open window. Lucas laid the woman gently on the quilt while his mother bustled in behind them. "Mrs. Holloway, fetch some cool water and cloths," Martha instructed. "Lucas, go get my smelling salts from my dresser." As Lucas left, Martha began loosening the woman's high collar and removing her shoes. By the time he returned with the small vial, Mrs. Holloway had brought water, and his mother was bathing the stranger's face with a damp cloth. "She's exhausted and likely hasn't eaten properly in days," Martha pronounced. Probably been traveling hard with little rest. These city folk never understand what the journey out west does to the body. Lucas uncorked the smelling salts and held them beneath the woman's nose. After a moment, her eyelids fluttered and she let out a small moan. When her eyes finally opened, Lucas found himself staring into the deepest brown eyes he'd ever seen. "Where?" She managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "You're safe, dear," Martha assured her. "You're at Whitaker boarding house in Dry Creek. You collapsed at the train depot." The woman tried to sit up but fell back weakly against the pillows. "My things, all here," Mrs. Holloway said kindly, patting the valise she'd set by the door. "I'm Beatrice Norwood," the woman said, each word clearly an effort. "I'm meant to be the new schoolteacher." Lucas and his mother exchanged glances. The town had been expecting a new teacher, but not for another week. "Well, Miss Norwood," Martha said, "you're in no condition to be teaching anyone just yet. You need rest and proper nourishment." "I can't afford," Beatrice began, distress evident in her eyes. "The school board will cover your lodging until you're well," Lucas interrupted, though he had no authority to make such promises. He'd square it with Mayor Phillips later. "Dr. Pearson will check on you when he returns." Relief softened Beatrice's features. "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker." "Lucas Whitaker," he replied, suddenly conscious of his dusty clothes and the 3-day stubble on his jaw. "And this is my mother, Martha." "You carried me here?" Beatrice asked, a faint blush coloring her pale cheeks. Lucas nodded, strangely tongue-tied in the face of her direct gaze. "Let's let Miss Norwood rest," Martha suggested, ushering Lucas and Mrs. Holloway toward the door. "I'll bring up some broth in a bit, dear." Outside in the hallway, Martha gave her son a knowing look. "Get along now. Those horses won't settle themselves at the livery." Lucas nodded but found himself oddly reluctant to leave. "Send for me when Doc comes by," he said. "I want to make sure she's all right." His mother's lips curved in a small smile. "Of course." For the rest of the day, Lucas found his thoughts returning to the schoolteacher with the brown eyes. He told himself it was merely concern for a stranger in need. But even as he worked with the wild mustangs at the corral, he kept glancing toward the boarding house, wondering if Beatrice Norwood was resting comfortably. Beatrice awoke to golden evening light filtering through lace curtains. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, panic rising in her throat until the events of the day came flooding back. The train, the exhaustion, collapsing on the platform, and then strong arms carrying her to safety. She pushed herself up against the pillows, feeling marginally stronger after a few hours of sleep. Someone had loosened her clothing and removed her shoes, but she was otherwise still dressed in her traveling suit, now hopelessly wrinkled. A soft knock came at the door. "Miss Norwood." "Are you awake?" It was Martha Whitaker's voice. "Yes, please come in," Beatrice called, her voice stronger than before. Martha entered carrying a tray with a steaming bowl and a cup of tea. "I thought you might be ready for some nourishment. Dr. Pearson is downstairs. He can come up when you've had something to eat." "Thank you for your kindness," Beatrice said sincerely as Martha set the tray across her lap. The aroma of chicken broth made her stomach growl embarrassingly loud. Martha chuckled. "When did you last eat a proper meal, child?" Beatrice considered. "I had some bread and cheese yesterday morning in Cheyenne, but the dining car was so expensive." "Well, you eat every bit of that broth, and there's more where it came from," Martha said firmly. "A young woman shouldn't starve herself, especially not one making such a journey alone." As Beatrice ate, Martha bustled around the room, opening a window wider to let in the cool evening breeze and turning down the lamp. There was something comforting about the older woman's presence, something that reminded Beatrice of her own mother, gone these past 5 years. "Mrs. Whitaker," Beatrice began hesitantly. "Your son. He was very kind to help me. I hope I can thank him properly when I'm feeling better." "Lucas has always had a soft heart beneath that rough exterior," Martha replied with obvious pride. "He's finishing up at the livery now, but he asked to be informed when the doctor arrived." She paused, studying Beatrice. "You've brought a flush to his cheeks I haven't seen in some time." Beatrice felt her own cheeks warm. "I'm sure he would have done the same for anyone in distress." "Perhaps," Martha said with a knowing smile. "Finish your soup, dear. I'll send the doctor up." Dr. Pearson was a gruff man in his 60s with spectacles perched on the end of his nose and hands gentle despite their weathered appearance. He examined Beatrice efficiently, listening to her chest and checking her pulse. "Exhaustion and mild dehydration," he pronounced. "Common enough for newcomers making the journey west, especially young ladies unused to such travel. Will I be well enough to begin teaching next week?" Beatrice asked anxiously. "The school board is expecting me. A few days of rest, proper meals, and you'll be right as rain," Dr. Pearson assured her. "Though I'd recommend waiting until Monday next to begin your duties. Give yourself time to recover fully." Before Beatrice could respond, there was another knock at the door. Dr. Pearson opened it to reveal Lucas Whittaker, hat in hand, his tall frame nearly filling the doorway. "Doc," Lucas nodded in greeting. "How's our patient? She'll live," Dr. Pearson said dryly. "Though she needs rest and good food." "Ma's cooking ought to fix that," Lucas replied, his eyes finding Beatrice's. "Feeling better, Miss Norwood?" "Much, thank you, Mr. Whittaker," she answered, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "And thank you for coming to my aid. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "Someone else would have helped," Lucas said modestly. "Not everyone would have carried her a quarter-mile to a proper bed," Dr. Pearson pointed out as he packed his medical bag. "Well, I've other patients to see. Miss Norwood, I'll check on you tomorrow. Until then, stay in bed except for necessary movements." After the doctor left, Lucas lingered awkwardly in the doorway. "I spoke with Mayor Phillips. The school board is arranging to cover your stay here until you're well enough to move into the teacher's cottage." "That's very generous," Beatrice said, relief washing over her. Her savings were meager, carefully budgeted for establishing herself in her new position. "I hope to repay everyone's kindness once I begin teaching." Lucas took a tentative step into the room. "What brings you all the way from?" He paused, realizing he didn't know where she'd come from. "Boston," she supplied. "And the promise of independence, I suppose." "My parents are gone, and my aunt, with whom I was living, recently remarried. Her husband has children of his own and little use for an extra mouth to feed." She hadn't meant to share so much, but something about Lucas Whittaker's steady gaze made the words tumble out. He didn't interrupt or offer platitudes, just nodded as though he understood perfectly. "Dry Creek's a good town," he said after a moment. "Small but growing. The children need a proper education. Last teacher we had left after a year couldn't stand the winters." "I'm made of sterner stuff than I appear, Mr. Whittaker," Beatrice said with more conviction than she felt, especially given the day's events. A smile curved his mouth, transforming his weathered face. "I believe you are, Miss Norwood." Martha appeared in the doorway. "Lucas, leave the poor girl to rest. You can continue your conversation when she's feeling stronger." "Yes, Ma," Lucas said, replacing his hat. "Good night, Miss Norwood. I hope you feel better by morning." "Good night, Mr. Whittaker, and thank you again." After they left, Beatrice sank back against the pillows, exhaustion overtaking her once more. As she drifted toward sleep, she found herself thinking of Lucas Whittaker's blue eyes and the gentle way he'd carried her to safety. The next morning, Beatrice woke feeling considerably stronger. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. and the sounds of Dry Creek coming to life drifted through the open window wagon wheels on dirt roads, the distant hammer of the blacksmith, voices calling greetings. She managed to sit up and swing her legs over the side of the bed, without the dizziness that had plagued her the day before. Her valise stood against the wall, and she was just contemplating whether she had the strength to retrieve a fresh change of clothes when Martha knocked and entered with a breakfast tray. "Well, you're looking much improved," Martha said approvingly, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "Think you can make it over here to eat?" "I believe so," Beatrice said, rising carefully. She was still weak, but no longer felt as though she might collapse at any moment. She made her way to the chair Martha had pulled out and sat down gratefully. "I've brought fresh water for washing," Martha continued, indicating a pitcher and basin on the dresser. "And once you've eaten, I can help you change if you like. You'll feel better in clean clothes." "You're very kind," Beatrice said, deeply touched by the woman's thoughtfulness. "Nonsense. It's what any decent person would do," Martha replied, but her eyes were warm. "Now eat up. You need your strength." The breakfast was simple but delicious: scrambled eggs, toast with preserves, and strong tea. Beatrice ate more than she'd expected to, her appetite returning with her strength. "Lucas rode out early to check on a herd," Martha mentioned as she helped Beatrice into a fresh day dress of pale blue cotton. "He said to tell you he hopes you're feeling better." "He raises cattle?" Beatrice asked, lifting her arm so Martha could fasten the buttons at the back of the dress. "Horses mainly," Martha explained. "He breaks and trains them for ranches throughout the territory, has a way with the wild ones that nobody can match." "He seems very capable," Beatrice observed. Martha laughed softly. "That he is. Too capable for his own good sometimes. Takes on everyone else's troubles and forgets to mind his own." She finished the last button and stepped back. "There. You look much more yourself now." With Martha's assistance, Beatrice managed to brush and re-pin her hair. The simple tasks exhausted her more than she wanted to admit, but it felt good to be somewhat presentable again. "You think I might sit downstairs for a while?" she asked. "I'd like to see a bit more of Dry Creek than just this room, lovely as it is." "Dr. Pearson did say you should rest," Martha reminded her, "but I suppose a short time in the parlor wouldn't hurt if you're up to the stairs." The journey downstairs was slow but manageable with Martha's steady arm for support. The boarding house's parlor was comfortably furnished with a settee, several armchairs, and a bookcase filled with well-thumbed volumes. Through the front windows, Beatrice could see Dry Creek's Main Street, a wide dirt road lined with wooden buildings, some boasting false fronts in an attempt at grandeur. "It's larger than I expected," Beatrice commented as she settled on the settee. "Growing every month," Martha confirmed. "The railroads changed everything. We've got nearly 800 souls now, counting the outlying farms and ranches." "And the school?" Beatrice asked, her professional interest piqued. 43 students at last count, ages 6 to 16, Martha replied. "They've been making do with Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, since Miss Abernathy left, but the children need a proper teacher." Beatrice nodded, a mixture of anticipation and anxiety fluttering in her stomach. 43 students of varying ages would be a challenge, but she was well trained and determined to succeed in her new position. Throughout the day, several of Dry Creek's residents stopped by the boarding house, ostensibly to welcome Beatrice to town, but clearly curious about the new school teacher who had made such a dramatic entrance. Martha kept the visits brief, mindful of Beatrice's still fragile health, but Beatrice appreciated meeting some of her new neighbors. Mayor Phillips, a portly man with mutton chop sideburns, assured her that the school was ready for her whenever Dr. Pearson declared her fit to begin teaching. Mrs. Henderson brought a hand-drawn map of the town, carefully marking important locations including the school, church, and general store. Even the town's newspaper editor, a young man named Edward Collins, stopped by, clearly hoping for a story about the Eastern schoolteacher who had swooned at the depot. By late afternoon, Beatrice was exhausted but pleased with her introduction to the community. She was resting on the settee with a book from Martha's collection when the front door opened, and Lucas Whittaker entered, bringing with him the sense of horses, leather, and the outdoors. He stopped short when he saw her, removing his hat quickly. "Miss Norwood, you're up and about." "Barely," she admitted with a small smile, "but improving thanks to your mother's excellent care." Lucas glanced around, presumably looking for Martha. "Ma's gone to the mercantile," Beatrice explained. "She said she wouldn't be long," he nodded, seeming uncertain whether to stay or go. Finally, he moved to an armchair across from her. "Town's been talking about nothing but you today," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I hadn't planned such a memorable arrival," Beatrice replied, her cheeks warming. "I had hoped to make a more dignified first impression." "Folks here don't stand much on ceremony," Lucas assured her. "They're more interested in whether you'll be able to get their children reading and ciphering properly." "That I can promise," Beatrice said with conviction. "I may not be accustomed to your Western ways yet, but I am a good teacher, Mr. Whittaker." "I don't doubt it," he said, his blue eyes studying her face. "And please call me Lucas. Mr. Whittaker makes me feel like my father." "Then you must call me Beatrice," she replied, feeling a small thrill at the informality. In Boston, such familiarity would have been considered forward, but the rules seemed different here in Wyoming territory. "Beatrice," he repeated, as though testing the sound of her name. "It suits you." Before she could respond, Martha returned, arms laden with parcels. Lucas jumped up to help her, taking the packages and setting them on a side table. "I see you two are getting acquainted," Martha observed, her eyes moving between them. "Just keeping Miss Norwood Beatrice company until you returned," Lucas explained. "Well, now you can make yourself useful and help me prepare supper," Martha said. "Beatrice, you should rest before the evening meal. You've had enough excitement for one day." Though she was reluctant to end her conversation with Lucas, Beatrice couldn't deny her fatigue. With his assistance, she made her way back upstairs to the blue room, where she rested until Martha called her down for supper. The meal was simple but hearty: roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. The boarding house's 3 other residents joined them: Mr. Grayson, an elderly accountant who worked at the bank; Miss Winters, a middle-aged seamstress; and Mr. Thornton, a land surveyor working for the railroad. The conversation flowed easily, with everyone curious about Beatrice's life in Boston and her journey west. Lucas said little during the meal, but Beatrice often felt his eyes on her. When their gazes met, he would offer a small smile before returning his attention to his food. There was something compelling about his quiet strength, so different from the verbose young men she had known in Boston. After supper, despite her protests that she should help clear the table, Beatrice was shooed back to the parlor to rest. Lucas followed a few minutes later, taking the same armchair he had occupied earlier. "You play chess?" he asked, gesturing to a small table with an inlaid board between them. "I do, though I'm not particularly skilled," Beatrice admitted. "Would you care for a game?" "Something to pass the evening," Beatrice nodded, and Lucas set up the pieces with practiced hands. As they played, he told her about Dry Creek, its history, the people, the challenges of life in Wyoming territory. He spoke of the harsh winters, the summer droughts, the isolation that drove some settlers back east. "You make it sound rather forbidding," Beatrice observed, moving her bishop cautiously across the board. "It can be," Lucas acknowledged, But there's freedom here that you won't find in the East. Room to breathe, to become whatever you choose. He captured her bishop with a knight she hadn't noticed was threatening. Check. Beatrice frowned at the board, moving her king out of danger. Is that why you stay? For the freedom? Lucas considered her question as he studied the game. Partly. This land gets in your blood, and there's Ma to think of. She wouldn't leave the boarding house, and I wouldn't leave her. He moved his queen. Checkmate in 3 moves. Beatrice examined the board and saw he was right. You play well, she conceded, tipping over her king in surrender. My father taught me, Lucas said, a shadow passing over his face. He believed chess built character. He sounds like a wise man. He was. Lucas began resetting the pieces. Another game they played until Martha came in and insisted Beatrice needed her rest. As Lucas helped her up the stairs for the second time that day, Beatrice found herself acutely aware of his hand beneath her elbow, the solid warmth of his presence beside her. At her door, he hesitated. Sleep well, Beatrice. I'll be gone before dawn tomorrow taking horses to a ranch near Laramie, but I'll return in a few days. Thank you for the chess games, she said. And the company. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. My pleasure. As Beatrice prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of Lucas's blue eyes and the gentle way his calloused fingers had moved the chess pieces. She had come to Wyoming for independence, for a fresh start away from the constraints of Boston society. Romance had been the furthest thing from her mind, and yet, as she drifted toward sleep, it was Lucas Whittaker's face that filled her thoughts. The next 3 days passed quickly as Beatrice regained her strength. By the second day, she was able to walk to the school building with Martha, where she spent several hours familiarizing herself with the classroom and reviewing the available textbooks. The one-room schoolhouse was plain but functional, with rows of wooden desks, a pot-bellied stove for the winter months, and a small collection of books and slates. Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife who had been filling in as teacher, welcomed Beatrice warmly and provided a notebook with each child's name, age, and academic standing. It was clear the children's education had been somewhat haphazard during the interim period, but Beatrice was confident she could bring structure and progress to their learning. By the 3rd day, Dr. Pearson declared her fit to move into the teacher's cottage, a small but tidy structure behind the schoolhouse. Martha helped her settle in, providing linens, kitchenware, and food to tide her over until she could shop for herself at the general store. It's not much, Martha said, looking around the 2-room cottage, but it's private and close to the school. It's perfect, Beatrice assured her. The front room served as both parlor and kitchen with a small table, 2 chairs, a settee, and a cast-iron cookstove. The back room contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. It was modest compared to her aunt's home in Boston, but it was hers alone, a space where she could build her new life. You'll join us for Sunday dinner tomorrow? Martha asked as she prepared to leave. Lucas should be back by then. I'd be delighted, Beatrice replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the mention of Lucas's return. That evening, as Beatrice sat on the cottage's small front porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson, she felt a contentment she hadn't expected to find so quickly in this unfamiliar place. Dry Creek was nothing like Boston, with its cobblestone streets and brick buildings, but there was a warmth to the community that had embraced her despite her inauspicious arrival. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Beatrice dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep green cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and walked to the small white church at the end of Main Street. The congregation welcomed her enthusiastically, many introducing themselves as parents of her future students. She had just taken a seat in a pew near the back when the church door opened again, and Lucas entered. He was transformed from the dusty cowboy who had carried her from the depot. Clean-shaven, his dark hair neatly combed, he wore a black suit that, while not new, fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Their eyes met across the church, and he offered a small nod before taking a seat beside his mother several pews ahead. Throughout the service, Beatrice found her attention wandering from Reverend Henderson's sermon to the back of Lucas's head. When the congregation rose to sing hymns, she could hear his baritone blending with the other voices, strong and true. After the service, as people gathered on the church steps to socialize, Lucas made his way to her side. "Welcome to Dry Creek's social hour," he said with a wry smile. "More gossip happens here on Sunday mornings than in the saloon all week." "Is that so?" Beatrice replied, amused by his observation. "And what might they be gossiping about today?" "The new schoolteacher, of course," he said, his blue eyes twinkling. "And the cowboy who carried her from the depot." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. Surely they have more interesting topics to discuss. "Not in Dry Creek," Lucas assured her. "Though the miller's new baby and the Anderson brothers' feud over water rights are close contenders." They were interrupted by Mayor Phillips, who wanted to introduce Beatrice to several more townsfolk. By the time she had met everyone and answered countless questions about her plans for the school, Lucas had disappeared. Disappointed, she made her way back to her cottage to change before dinner at the Whitacres. When she arrived at the boarding house later that afternoon, Martha welcomed her with a warm embrace. "Lucas is out back checking on a sick horse," she explained, leading Beatrice to the kitchen. "He'll be in shortly. Can I get you some tea while we finish preparing dinner?" Beatrice insisted on helping, and soon she was peeling potatoes while Martha tended to a roast in the oven. There was something soothing about the domestic task, so different from the formal meals prepared by servants in her aunt's Boston home. "You seem at home in the kitchen," Martha observed, watching Beatrice's deft movements with the knife. "My mother believed every woman should know how to cook, regardless of social standing," Beatrice explained. "She taught me before she fell ill." "She sounds like a sensible woman," Martha said approvingly. "Too many Eastern ladies come west with no practical skills, expecting to find the same conveniences they left behind." "I'm under no such illusions," Beatrice assured her, "though I admit I have much to learn about life in Wyoming territory." "You'll adapt," Martha said confidently. "You have a resilient spirit. I could see that even when you were half dead from exhaustion." Before Beatrice could respond, the back door opened, and Lucas entered, bringing with him the scent of hay and horses. He had changed from his church clothes into more casual attire, though he had kept the clean-shaven look that accentuated the strong line of his jaw. "Beatrice," he greeted her, his face lighting up with a smile that made her heart skip. "You're looking well. The cottage suits you." "Very much," she replied, "though I'm still learning my way around the cook stove." "We'll have to make sure you don't starve before you master it," Lucas said, his tone teasing. "Can't have our new teacher wasting away." Dinner was a lively affair, with Lucas regaling them with tales from his trip to Laramie. He had a gift for storytelling, painting vivid pictures of the characters he'd met and the wild horses he'd delivered to a wealthy rancher. "The man had no idea what to do with them," Lucas explained, shaking his head. "Bought them because they were beautiful, not because he understood their spirit. I spent an extra day showing his hands how to approach them properly." "Will they be treated well?" Beatrice asked, concerned. Lucas's expression softened at her question. "I made sure of it. Wouldn't have left them otherwise." After dinner, while Martha insisted on handling the dishes alone, Lucas invited Beatrice to see the small stable behind the boarding house where he kept his own horses. "I'd like you to meet Midnight," he said. "Best horse I've ever had." The evening air was cool as they walked across the yard to a well-maintained stable. Inside, a magnificent black stallion whickered softly in greeting when Lucas approached his stall. "He's beautiful," Beatrice breathed, admiring the horse's glossy coat and intelligent eyes. "Caught him wild 3 years ago," Lucas said, stroking the stallion's nose affectionately. "Took months to gain his trust, but now we understand each other perfectly. May I?" Beatrice asked, reaching a tentative hand toward the horse. "Of course. He's gentle with those he senses mean no harm." Beatrice carefully stroked Midnight's velvety nose, delighted when the horse leaned into her touch. "I've always loved horses, though I rarely had the opportunity to ride in Boston." "No riding at all?" Lucas asked, surprised. "Occasionally in the park, but only side saddle, of course, and never faster than a gentle trot," Beatrice explained. It was considered unladylike to show too much enthusiasm for riding. Lucas shook his head, clearly finding this notion ridiculous. "Out here, knowing how to ride well isn't a matter of propriety, it's practical necessity. Would you like to learn? Properly, I mean." Beatrice's eyes widened. "You teach me." "I'd be happy to," Lucas said. "We could start next weekend if you'd like. I have a gentle mare that would be perfect for a beginner." "I'd like that very much," Beatrice replied, touched by his offer. They stayed in the stable for some time, Lucas introducing her to his other horses and explaining his training methods. As the light faded, they returned to the house, walking close together through the gathering dusk. "Will you join us for chess again?" Lucas asked as they reached the porch. "I should return to the cottage," Beatrice said reluctantly. "Tomorrow is my first day of teaching and I want to be well prepared." "Of course," Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "May I walk you home then?" The short walk to the teacher's cottage was filled with comfortable conversation about the town, the upcoming school year, and Beatrice's impressions of Wyoming thus far. At her door, Lucas hesitated, seeming reluctant to leave. "Good luck tomorrow," he said finally. "The children will love you." "I hope so," Beatrice replied, suddenly nervous about the day ahead. "They will," Lucas assured her. "And if any of the older boys give you trouble, just mention you're friends with Lucas Whitaker. That should settle them down." Beatrice laughed. "Are you the town's disciplinarian then?" "Hardly," he grinned. "But I have been known to take troublemakers on cattle drives. Nothing teaches respect faster than 3 days in the saddle chasing strays." "I'll keep that in mind," Beatrice promised, her eyes meeting his in the fading light. For a moment, it seemed as though Lucas might say something more, but instead he simply tipped his hat. "Good night, Beatrice. I'll see you soon." "Good night, Lucas." As she watched him walk away, Beatrice felt a curious mixture of anticipation and contentment. Wyoming territory was already proving to be far more interesting than she had anticipated. Beatrice's first day at the Dry Creek School began early, with children arriving before the 8 o'clock bell, curious about their new teacher. They filed in shyly, taking their accustomed seats and watching her with wide eyes as she wrote her name on the blackboard. "Miss Norwood." "Good morning, children," she greeted them warmly. "I'm very pleased to meet each of you and look forward to our time learning together." The youngest pupils, seated at the front, gazed at her with undisguised curiosity, while the older students at the back maintained carefully neutral expressions, clearly reserving judgment on this newcomer from the East. Drawing on her training and experience as a teacher's assistant in Boston, Beatrice quickly established a routine, assessing each child's abilities and organizing them into groups for instruction. By midday, she had begun to learn their names and personalities: bright little Sarah Miller with her missing front teeth, serious James Peterson, who devoured books on exploration, mischievous twins Thomas and Timothy White, who clearly tested every teacher's patience. When school dismissed at 4 o'clock, Beatrice felt exhausted but satisfied. The day had gone better than she dared hope, with even the most reluctant students showing interest in her innovative teaching methods. She was erasing the blackboard when a knock at the open door made her turn. Lucas stood in the doorway, hat in hand, a warm smile lighting his features. "Survived your first day, I see," he said, stepping into the classroom. "Barely," Beatrice laughed, setting down the eraser. "But yes, it went well. The children are bright and eager to learn, even the Anderson boys." Lucas asked skeptically, referring to 3 notoriously rowdy brothers who had been the bane of previous teachers. "Even them," Beatrice confirmed. "Though I suspect they were on their best behavior today, sizing up the new teacher before deciding how much trouble they can cause." Lucas chuckled. "Smart assessment. They've run off 2 teachers already." "Well, they won't run me off," Beatrice said firmly. "I've dealt with difficult students before." "I believe you," Lucas said, his expression serious despite the smile that still played around his mouth. "You have a strength that doesn't immediately show." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm at his perceptive comment. "What brings you to the schoolhouse? Surely not concern for my ability to handle a few unruly boys." "Actually, I brought you something," Lucas said, suddenly looking slightly uncomfortable. He produced a small package wrapped in brown paper from his pocket. "It's not much, just a small welcome gift." Surprised and touched, Beatrice carefully unwrapped the package to find a beautifully carved wooden bookmark, decorated with intricate wildflowers native to Wyoming. "Lucas, it's lovely," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Did you make this?" He nodded, a hint of color rising in his tanned cheeks. "Carving helps pass the time on long cattle drives. Mom mentioned you enjoy reading, so—" "Thank you," Beatrice said sincerely. "It's the most thoughtful gift." They stood looking at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with something Beatrice couldn't quite name. Finally, Lucas cleared his throat. "I should let you finish up here," he said, "but I wanted to confirm our riding lesson this weekend if you're still interested." "Very much so," Beatrice assured him. "Saturday morning, perfect. I'll come by the cottage around 9 if that suits you." After Lucas left, Beatrice found herself smiling as she finished her tasks around the classroom. The wooden bookmark felt like a promise of something more than friendship, though she hardly dared acknowledge such thoughts, even to herself. The remainder of the week passed in a blur of lessons, getting to know her students and settling into her role in the community. Each evening, Beatrice would return to her cottage, prepare a simple meal, and plan the next day's lessons. Occasionally, she would catch sight of Lucas around town loading supplies at the mercantile, deep in conversation with the blacksmith, or riding midnight down Main Street. Each time, he would tip his hat or raise a hand in greeting, his smile warming her even from a distance. By Saturday morning, Beatrice was filled with anticipation for her riding lesson. She had rummaged through her limited wardrobe and settled on her plainest skirt and shirtwaist, practical if not ideal for horseback riding. She was plaiting her hair into a single braid when a knock came at her door precisely at 9 o'clock. Lucas stood on her porch, looking every inch the cowboy in his worn denim, leather vest, and Stetson. His eyes widened slightly as they took in her appearance, her hair loose around her shoulders in the midst of braiding. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I'm early." "I can wait." "Not at all," Beatrice replied, stepping back to invite him in. "I'm nearly ready. Please, come in while I finish with my hair." The cottage felt suddenly smaller with Lucas's tall frame filling the space. He removed his hat, looking around with interest at the few personal touches Beatrice had added to her new home, books stacked on the small table, a vase of wildflowers on the windowsill, her mother's quilt folded neatly on the settee. "You've made it homey," he observed. "I'm trying," Beatrice admitted, resuming her braiding. "It's very different from what I'm accustomed to, but I find I like the simplicity." Lucas watched her fingers work deftly through her chestnut hair, his expression unreadable. When she finished and tied off the braid with a ribbon, he seemed to shake himself from a reverie. "I've brought Daisy for you to ride," he said. "She's gentle but not too plodding, perfect for a beginner." Outside, 2 horses waited patiently. Midnight with his glossy black coat, and beside him a pretty sorrel mare with a white blaze down her nose. "She's beautiful," Beatrice said, approaching Daisy cautiously. "She is," Lucas agreed. "And she has the sweetest temperament of any horse I've trained. Here, give her a chance to know you." He demonstrated how to let Daisy smell her hand before patting the mare's neck. Beatrice followed his example, delighted when the horse nuzzled her palm gently. "She likes you," Lucas said with satisfaction. "Now, let me show you how to mount." The next hour was filled with careful instruction as Lucas taught Beatrice the basics of horsemanship: how to hold the reins, how to signal the horse to walk, trot, and stop, how to maintain her balance in the saddle. He had thoughtfully brought a woman's saddle, which allowed her to ride more comfortably in her skirt, though he mentioned that many women in Wyoming wore split skirts or even trousers for riding. "Scandalous by Boston standards," Beatrice laughed, "but I can see the practicality." They rode at a walk along the outskirts of town, then followed a stream that wound through meadows brilliant with late summer wildflowers. Lucas was a patient teacher, staying close beside her and offering encouragement and corrections as needed. "You have a natural seat," he observed as Beatrice grew more confident. Ready to try a gentle trot, by the time they stopped for a rest in a grove of cottonwood trees beside the stream, Beatrice was flushed with exhilaration and newfound confidence. Dismounting with Lucas's assistance, she found her legs somewhat unsteady from the unaccustomed exercise. "You did wonderfully," Lucas praised, helping her sit on a fallen log while the horses drank from the stream. "Most beginners are terrified to trot on their first lesson." "It was exhilarating," Beatrice admitted, stretching her sore muscles. "Though I suspect I'll feel it tomorrow." Lucas smiled, producing a canteen of water and a small bundle wrapped in a cloth from his saddlebag. "Ma insisted I bring refreshments," he explained, unwrapping freshly baked bread, cheese, and apples. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, enjoying the peaceful setting and the gentle sound of the stream. Beatrice had never felt so at ease in a man's company before. In Boston, social interactions between unmarried men and women were carefully chaperoned, filled with formal conversation and subtle social cues. Here, with Lucas, everything felt refreshingly straightforward. "Tell me about your life before Wyoming," Lucas said, breaking the silence. What was Boston like? Beatrice considered his question. "Busy, crowded, full of rules about proper behavior, especially for young ladies," she smiled, remembering. "But also beautiful in its way: the harbor at sunset, the public garden in spring, bookshops on every corner. Do you miss it?" "Parts of it," she admitted. "The libraries particularly, but not the constraints. After my parents died and I went to live with my aunt, I felt stifled. Teaching was my only escape, the only place where I felt truly useful." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "And now, how does Dry Creek compare?" "It's too soon to say for certain," Beatrice replied honestly, "but I already feel more myself here, as though I can breathe more deeply." She glanced at him shyly. "The people have been very welcoming." "They recognize quality when they see it," Lucas said simply. Dry Creek needs people like you, educated, dedicated, willing to build something lasting." His words touched her deeply. "And you?" she asked. "Have you always lived here, born and raised?" Lucas confirmed. "My father came west after the war between the states, met my mother in Cheyenne. They started the boarding house together, but Pa always had wanderlust. He'd go off breaking horses for months at a time, then return with stories and gifts." A shadow crossed his face. "One time he didn't come back, thrown by a Mustang and broke his neck, they said." "I'm so sorry," Beatrice said softly. Lucas shrugged, though the pain was evident in his eyes. "It was a long time ago. I was 15, old enough to help Ma keep the boarding house going, young enough to miss him terribly." He met her gaze. "I learned from him, though, how to read a horse's intentions, how to be patient with the wild ones. And I learned what it costs a family when a man can't settle." The weight of his words hung between them. Beatrice sensed he was telling her something important about himself, about the kind of man he had chosen to be. "You've built a good life here," she observed. "I've tried," he agreed. "It's not always exciting, but it's honest work, and I sleep well at night." He smiled suddenly, the shadow lifting from his features. "And now, Miss Norwood, if you're rested, perhaps we should continue your lesson. There's a lovely meadow just beyond those trees that would be perfect for practicing your trot." The remainder of the afternoon passed too quickly for Beatrice's liking. Under Lucas's watchful guidance, she grew increasingly comfortable with Daisy, even managing a short canter that left her breathless with excitement. As they rode back toward town, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and amber, Beatrice felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. Wyoming territory, with its vast open spaces and straightforward people, was beginning to feel like home in a way Boston never had. At her cottage door, Lucas helped her dismount one final time, his hands strong and sure at her waist. She was acutely conscious of their proximity, of the way his eyes lingered on her face in the fading light. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself more." "The pleasure was mine," Lucas replied, his voice equally quiet. "Perhaps we could make this a regular occurrence. Sunday afternoons after church, I'd like that very much." For a moment, it seemed as though he might say more or perhaps do more, but instead, he simply squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Good night, Beatrice. Rest well. Those riding muscles will be sore tomorrow." As she watched him lead the horses away, Beatrice acknowledged to herself what she had been feeling all day. She was falling in love with Lucas Whitaker. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Weekdays were filled with teaching, with Beatrice gradually winning over even the most resistant students through a combination of firm discipline and genuine interest in their progress. Evenings were often spent at the boarding house, enjoying Martha's cooking and Lucas's company over chess or conversation. Sundays became the highlight of Beatrice's week. After church, she and Lucas would ride for hours, exploring the countryside around Dry Creek. Under his patient tutelage, she became a confident horsewoman, no longer nervous at a canter or even a controlled gallop across open meadows. As September gave way to October, the aspens turned golden and the air grew crisp. Beatrice found herself increasingly integrated into the community, invited to socials, sought out for advice on children's education, included in the ladies' sewing circle despite her admitted lack of skill with a needle. Her friendship with Lucas deepened with each passing day. They discovered shared interests in literature and history, often discussing books late into the evening on her cottage porch. He introduced her to his favorite places in the surrounding countryside, a hidden waterfall, a ridge with views that stretched to the horizon, a grove of ancient trees that had somehow survived countless prairie fires. Yet for all their growing closeness, Lucas maintained a careful distance that sometimes puzzled Beatrice. There were moments when she was certain he felt the same attraction she did when his hand lingered on hers as he helped her mount Daisy, when their eyes met across the dinner table, when they sat side by side on her porch watching the sunset. But always, just when it seemed he might speak of deeper feelings or perhaps even kiss her, he would pull back, redirecting the conversation or making an excuse to leave. Martha, observant as ever, commented on it one afternoon when Beatrice was helping her bake pies for the harvest festival. "My son is a cautious man," she said, rolling out pie dough with practiced movements, "especially when it comes to matters of the heart." Beatrice concentrated on peeling apples, hoping her blush wasn't too obvious. "I'm not sure what you mean." Martha's knowing look made it clear she wasn't fooled. "Lucas has been hurt before," she said after a moment. 4 years ago, he courted a young woman named Clara. She was from Denver, staying with relatives here for the summer. By August, they were engaged to be married. By September, she had returned to Denver, sending a letter to break the engagement. She couldn't face the prospect of life in a small Wyoming town, she wrote. The isolation would kill her spirit. "How terrible for him," Beatrice murmured, her heart aching at the thought of Lucas's pain. "He doesn't show it, but it left its mark," Martha continued, her voice gentle. "He's afraid to believe that an educated Eastern woman could be happy here permanently, afraid you'll realize one day that you miss city life too much to stay." Beatrice set down her knife, meeting Martha's gaze directly. "I have no intention of leaving Dry Creek," she said firmly. "I've found more happiness here in 2 months than in years in Boston." "I believe you," Martha replied with a warm smile, "but Lucas needs to believe it too. Give him time." The Harvest Festival the following weekend provided a welcome distraction from Beatrice's complicated feelings. The entire town gathered in the town square for food, music, games, and dancing. Children ran about playing tag and bobbing for apples while adults caught up on news and gossip. Beatrice had spent the morning helping set up the schoolchildren's display of harvest-themed artwork and compositions. By the time the festival officially began at noon, she was caught up in the festive atmosphere, enjoying the community's celebration of another year's successful crops. She was watching a sack race between her students when Lucas appeared at her side, looking handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his dark hair freshly trimmed. "The children seem to be enjoying themselves," he observed, following her gaze to where Timothy White was hopping determinedly toward the finish line, his face screwed up in concentration. "They've been looking forward to this for weeks," Beatrice replied with a smile. "Especially the promise of Mrs. Peterson's apple cider." "Best in the territory," Lucas agreed. "Speaking of which, may I fetch you a cup?" When he returned with 2 cups of steaming cider, they found a quiet spot at the edge of the square to watch the festivities. The afternoon sun was warm despite the autumn chill, and Beatrice felt a contentment that seemed to wrap around her like a comfortable shawl. "You've changed," Lucas said suddenly, his eyes studying her face. Surprised, Beatrice turned to him. "How so? You're more settled," he explained. "When you first arrived, despite your determination, there was a wariness about you, as though you were waiting to see if Dry Creek would accept you." He smiled. "Now you move through town as though you've always belonged here." "Perhaps because I feel I do belong," Beatrice said softly. "I never felt that in Boston, not truly." Lucas's expression grew serious. "Beatrice, there's something I've been wanting to ask you," but before he could continue, they were interrupted by Mayor Phillips, who insisted that the town's schoolteacher must judge the children's spelling competition about to begin. With an apologetic smile, Beatrice allowed herself to be led away, wondering what Lucas had been about to say. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a whirl of activities. Beatrice judged the spelling competition, applauded the winners of various contests, and sampled dishes from every family's harvest table. Throughout it all, she was aware of Lucas watching her from across the square, his expression thoughtful. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit and the town's small band struck up a lively tune. Couples began to gather for dancing, and Beatrice found herself swept into a Virginia reel by Mr. Collins, the newspaper editor, who had made no secret of his admiration for her since her arrival. "You look lovely tonight, Miss Norwood," he said as they moved through the steps of the dance. "The autumn air agrees with you." "Thank you, Mr. Collins," Beatrice replied politely, though her eyes sought Lucas in the crowd. She found him standing with several other men near the cider barrel, his expression unreadable as he watched her dance. When the reel ended, Mr. Collins seemed about to claim her for another dance, but Lucas appeared suddenly at her side. "May I have this dance, Miss Norwood?" he asked formally, offering his hand. The band had begun a waltz, a more intimate dance than the group reel. Beatrice placed her hand in Lucas's, feeling a thrill at his touch despite the barrier of her gloves. "I didn't know you danced," she said as he led her to the center of the makeshift dance floor, his hand warm at her waist. "There's a lot about me you don't know yet," he replied with a small smile. "Ma insisted I learn properly. Said no son of hers would clump around a dance floor like a bear with sore paws." Beatrice laughed, relaxing into his lead as they moved gracefully to the music. "She was right to insist. You dance beautifully." For a few minutes, they moved in harmony, the rest of the festival fading away as Beatrice lost herself in the simple joy of being in Lucas's arms. When the music ended, he didn't immediately release her, and she found herself looking up into eyes that had darkened with emotion. "Beatrice," he began, his voice low and intimate. "About what I was trying to ask earlier." Once again, they were interrupted, this time by shouts from the edge of the square. A horse and rider were approaching at a gallop, the animal's sides heaving with exertion. "Fire!" the rider shouted as he reined in sharply. "Fire at the Wilson place. They're trapped in the barn." The festive atmosphere evaporated instantly. Men rushed for horses while women organized buckets and blankets. Lucas squeezed Beatrice's hand once before releasing it. "I have to go," he said, already turning toward where Midnight was tethered. "Of course," she nodded, understanding immediately. "Be careful." For the next several hours, Beatrice worked alongside the other women, preparing bandages, boiling water, and caring for the children while the men fought the fire at the Wilson Ranch, 3 miles outside of town. It was well past midnight when they began to return. Exhausted and smoke-blackened but triumphant, the Wilsons were safe. And though the barn was lost, the house had been saved. Beatrice searched anxiously among the returning men until she spotted Lucas, his face streaked with soot, helping a limping Thomas Wilson toward the doctor's house. She hurried to assist, taking Wilson's other arm to support him. "Just a twisted ankle," Wilson explained grimly. "Got it moving livestock out of the barn. Could have been much worse if Lucas here hadn't arrived when he did." At the doctor's house, they handed Wilson over to Dr. Pearson's care. Outside in the cool night air, Beatrice finally had a moment alone with Lucas. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "Just tired," he assured her, though he winced slightly as he rolled his shoulder. "And I'll have a few new bruises tomorrow. A beam came down while we were getting the last horse out." Without thinking, Beatrice reached up to wipe a smudge of soot from his cheek, her touch gentle. "You could have been killed." Lucas caught her hand, holding it against his face for a moment. "It would take more than a burning barn to keep me from coming back to you," he said softly. The words hung between them in the quiet night, more revealing than any he had spoken before. Beatrice felt her heart swell with emotion as she met his steady gaze. "Lucas, there you are!" Martha's voice broke the moment as she hurried toward them. "Lucas, the mayor wants to speak with all the men who helped about rebuilding the barn. And Beatrice, Mrs. Wilson is asking for you. She's at our house with the children." With a reluctant sigh, Lucas released Beatrice's hand. "We'll talk tomorrow," he promised, before following his mother back toward the town square. But the next day brought no opportunity for private conversation. The entire community was focused on helping the Wilson family, with the men beginning to clear the burned remains of the barn, while the women organized clothing, food, and other necessities for the family, who would stay at the boarding house until their home could be properly cleaned of smoke damage. The following week was equally busy, with school in session and much of the town's energy directed toward the barn raising planned for the coming Saturday. Beatrice saw Lucas only briefly, usually in the company of others as they all worked toward helping the Wilson family recover from the fire. By Friday evening, Beatrice was beginning to wonder if she had imagined the intensity of the moment they had shared after the fire. She was grading arithmetic papers at her desk when a knock came at the schoolhouse door. Lucas stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat hesitant. "May I come in?" "Of course," Beatrice said, setting aside her work, her heart quickening at the sight of him. He entered, glancing around the empty classroom before his eyes settled on her. "I've missed you," he said simply. "I've missed you too," she admitted, rising from her desk. Lucas took a step closer, his expression serious. "Beatrice, I've been trying to find the right moment, the right words." He took a deep breath. "At the harvest festival before the fire, I was trying to ask if you would allow me to court you properly." Though she had hoped for this, hearing the words spoken aloud made Beatrice's breath catch. "Lucas, yes," she said softly. "Nothing would make me happier." The smile that transformed his face was worth every moment of uncertainty she had felt. In 2 strides, he closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I've wanted to ask for weeks," he confessed. "But I was afraid you might eventually regret choosing a life here with me." Beatrice squeezed his hands. "I have never been more certain of anything," she assured him. "My life began the day I collapsed at that depot and you carried me home." For a long moment, they stood looking at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then, slowly, Lucas leaned down, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished. Instead, Beatrice rose slightly on her toes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened as Lucas released her hands to cradle her face. Beatrice felt as though her heart might burst with happiness as she wound her arms around his neck, returning his kiss with all the emotion she had kept carefully contained for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I found you at the depot," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Even when I was half dead from exhaustion," Beatrice teased. "Even then," he confirmed, "though you're considerably more lively now." They laughed together, joy bubbling up between them like a spring. Outside, the last golden light of day was fading, but neither made any move to light the lamps. In the gathering dusk, Lucas kissed her again, more confidently this time, and Beatrice responded with equal fervor, all her carefully maintained propriety forgotten in the wonder of being in his arms at last. Winter came early to Wyoming territory that year, with the first snow falling in early November. Beatrice, who had never experienced the harsh realities of a Western winter, found herself grateful for Lucas's foresight. In the weeks before the snow, he had chopped and stacked enough firewood beside her cottage to last through the coldest months, repaired drafty windows, and lined the roof with extra insulation. "The winters here can kill if you're not prepared," he explained as he worked. Especially for someone used to Boston winters. Their courtship progressed steadily through those early winter months. Lucas joined Beatrice for dinner at her cottage several times a week, bringing game he had hunted or vegetables from Martha's root cellar. On Sundays after church, they would go for sleigh rides across the snow-covered landscape, bundled together beneath thick buffalo robes, Beatrice marveling at the pristine beauty of the white-blanketed plains. By Christmas, there was talk throughout Dry Creek about when Lucas Whittaker might propose to the schoolteacher. Martha had begun dropping hints about family heirloom rings, and several of Beatrice's students had taken to giggling whenever Lucas came to walk her home from school. The Christmas Eve service at the church was especially beautiful that year, with evergreen boughs decorating the pews and candles casting a warm glow over the congregation. Beatrice sat beside Lucas and Martha, singing carols and feeling a deep sense of belonging as she looked around at the faces that had become so dear to her in the months since her arrival. After the service, as they walked through the gently falling snow toward the boarding house for Christmas Eve supper, Lucas took her hand, drawing her to a stop beneath the stars. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package from his coat pocket. "I'd like you to open it tonight if you would." Curious, Beatrice unwrapped the package to find a small wooden box, beautifully carved with the same wildflower pattern as the bookmark he had given her months before. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a ring, a delicate gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the starlight. Her breath caught as she looked up to find Lucas watching her intently, his eyes reflecting all the love she felt in her own heart. "Beatrice Norwood," he said softly, taking the ring from the box. "When you collapsed at the depot that day, I had no idea you would come to mean everything to me. I love you, your strength, your kindness, your determination. I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." He paused, a smile touching his lips. "Will you marry me?" Tears of happiness blurred Beatrice's vision as she nodded. "Yes, Lucas, with all my heart, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her tenderly as snowflakes settled on their shoulders and in their hair. When they broke apart, both were smiling so widely it almost hurt. "I thought perhaps a spring wedding," Lucas suggested as they continued toward the boarding house, his arm secure around her waist, "when the wildflowers are blooming." "Perfect," Beatrice agreed, her heart so full she could hardly speak. Martha was waiting for them on the boarding house porch, her knowing smile indicating she had guessed what had transpired. As they approached, she opened her arms to embrace Beatrice. "Welcome to the family, my dear," she whispered. "I couldn't have chosen better for my son if I'd tried." The months between Christmas and their May wedding passed in a blur of happiness for Beatrice. She continued teaching, now with a gold ring on her finger that caught the light as she wrote on the blackboard. The children were delighted by the upcoming wedding, with the girls especially fascinated by the preparations. Lucas, meanwhile, was building them a house, a sturdy two-story home on a plot of land not far from the boarding house, with a view of the mountains from the front porch. Beatrice watched its progress with growing excitement, helping to choose details like the placement of windows and the color of paint for the kitchen cabinets. "It needs to be perfect," Lucas explained as he showed her the extra deep window seats he had constructed in what would be their parlor. "A place where you'll never regret staying in Dry Creek. I could live in a one-room cabin and be happy as long as I was with you," Beatrice assured him, touched by his devotion to creating a home that would please her. The wedding took place on a perfect May morning, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows around Dry Creek just as Lucas had predicted. The entire town turned out for the ceremony at the small white church, which had been decorated with ribbons and early spring blossoms by Beatrice's students. Beatrice wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha had helped her sew, with her mother's lace veil and a bouquet of blue columbine and white daisies. As she walked down the aisle toward Lucas, who waited for her with love shining in his eyes, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. Reverend Henderson's words washed over her in a haze of joy as she and Lucas exchanged vows and rings. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes and cheers from the assembled townsfolk. The celebration afterward was held in the town square, with tables laden with food, music from the local band, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As dusk fell and lanterns were lit, Lucas led Beatrice away from the festivities toward where Midnight and Daisy waited, saddled and ready. "Where are we going?" Beatrice asked, surprised. "Our home," Lucas replied, helping her mount Daisy. "I thought you might prefer a quiet first evening as Mrs. Whittaker, rather than staying at the boarding house with all of Dry Creek likely to serenade us half the night." The house was perfect in the twilight, with lanterns already lit inside casting a warm glow through the windows. Lucas had furnished it simply but comfortably, with some pieces from the boarding house and others he had made himself during the winter months. At the threshold, he surprised her by lifting her into his arms, just as he had the day they met. "Welcome home, Mrs. Whittaker," he said softly, carrying her across the threshold and into their new life together. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Beatrice rested her head on Lucas's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she whispered. Lucas's arms tightened around her. "Nor I," he admitted. "When I saw you collapse at that depot, all I thought was that you needed help. I had no idea you were exactly what I needed, what I'd been waiting for without even knowing it." Beatrice smiled against his skin. "It seems we saved each other." The years that followed brought all the joys and challenges of life on the Wyoming frontier. Beatrice continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Martha, after both their mothers. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, William Lucas, who had his father's blue eyes and stubborn determination. Lucas's horse training business prospered, his reputation spreading throughout the territory for his skill with even the wildest mustangs. When Beatrice expressed an interest in helping, he taught her enough that they could work as partners during the summers when school was not in session. Dry Creek grew along with the Whittaker family, the railroad bringing new settlers and opportunities. By the time Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, the town had nearly doubled in size, boasting a new 2-room schoolhouse where Beatrice occasionally substituted when the regular teacher needed assistance. On the 10th anniversary of the day they met, Lucas surprised Beatrice with a journey not back east as she might have expected, but to the mountains he loved, where he had built a small cabin beside a lake as clear as crystal. "I thought we deserved some time alone," he explained as they rode up the winding trail, their children safely in Martha's care for the week. Away from the town, the horses, the constant demands. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with a stone fireplace and a porch overlooking the water. That evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Lucas took her hand, his thumb brushing over the worn gold band he had placed there a decade before. "Any regrets?" he asked, his voice serious beneath the casual question. "About staying in Wyoming. About the life we've built. Beatrice turned to him, seeing in his beloved face the same handsome features that had been her first sight upon waking in the boarding house all those years ago. There were new lines at the corners of his eyes, a touch of silver at his temples, but his gaze held the same steadfast love that had sustained her through every joy and sorrow they had shared. "Not one," she said with complete conviction. "Collapsing at that depot was the best thing that ever happened to me, Lucas Whittaker. It brought me to you." His smile, still capable of making her heart skip a beat after all these years, was answer enough as he pulled her close. In the gathering twilight, with the mountains standing sentinel around them, they held each other, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other exactly what they needed: a love strong enough to weather any storm, deep enough to last a lifetime, and true enough to feel like coming home with every embrace. And as stars began to appear in the darkening sky above the Wyoming wilderness they both loved, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged, not in a place, but in the arms of the cowboy who had lifted her when she fell and carried her home.